Hey ladies, sisters in Christ, Dr. Bill Sinyard here again with God's love for the unlovable. We're going through the greatest gospel presentation of God's love for the unlovable in the entire Old Testament. Unfortunately, we've spent a millennia or two or three even overlooking the book or misrepresenting it, misunderstanding it, and no more. I know this isn't how you've heard it taught, but stay with me, and I'm telling you it could change your lives, our lives, and begin to heal those relational wounds, emotional wounds, and hurts. Look, we all know Christians who are hurting, men and women who feel church damaged, who feel lost and beat up. I got my hair cut last week by a kind lady who described herself as a Christo-pagan. Her story was filled with she-shaming by really abusive, orthodox, strict, patriarchal churches and people and family members. And, she agreed with my title that she was church damaged. And she wants more of God's love, right? She wants this love of God for the unlovable, but she's not finding it. So we're going to do that today. Welcome to God's love for the unlovable. So the great director D.W. Griffith once said that great directors make people see. And that's my role in this podcast and series, is to make people see. But first, we want to get into a little of ancient Hebrew poetical, technical stuff, not too deep in the weeds. After studying this 117-verse book for over a decade, I've come to the conclusion that it has 7 distinctive movements in a chiastic formation. Meaning the book is highly structured ancient Hebrew poetry. Don't think roses are red, violets are blue. Hebrew poetry has less rhyming at the end of lines that we're used to and more structural parallelism and repeated words and lines and imagery and chiasms. When you register at gospelrant.com, I'm going to send you this diagram with everything that's on it, and it's going to be very helpful as you read the Song of Songs. You will also get another free gift from us. Check it out, gospelrant.com. So in the Song of Songs, imagine a pyramid overarching poetic structure. The base of the pyramid to the left is the prologue, chapter 1, verses 2 to 4, balanced by an epilogue, chapter 8, verses 5 to 14. And we looked at the prologue in the last podcast. Then a movement 1, chapter 1, verse 5 to 2:7, balanced by a parallel movement 7, chapter 7, verse 11 to 8, verse 4. Then movements 2, that's chapter 2, verses 8 to 17, parallel to movement 6, chapter 6, 4 to 7, 10. Then 3 and 5 parallel, that's chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, and chapter 5, 2 to 6, 3. All literarily moving the reader's attentions and expectation to the pinnacle movement 4. Chapter 3, verse 6 to 5, verse 1. And that's the shocking, scandalous, incongruous marriage between the king and the unlikely queen. Now, if you're tracking that, there is arguably a pinnacle verse where the king, he's adoring his bride from head to toe, and he cries out, "All beautiful you are, my darling. There is no flaw in you." And so the driving mystery, the plot line, if you will, because we know that she is hardly perfect. She is not even worthy. It's a scandalous marriage, and it seems that everyone can see that except the love-struck king. In his eyes, she is stunning, amazing, perfect, no flaw. So he does no she-shaming at all, zero. He can't love her any more or any less than he does right now, as she is, and far more than anyone else has ever loved her, including her herself. So who does this king's love, incongruous love, most scandalize? It's her. She just struggles to believe it, to trust it, to let her emotional defenses down and to enter into his love, into his embrace. In the wonderful mystery of the prophetic poetry, this is you, ladies, and me. Jesus purchased this for us, and I get it. You likely haven't felt it as much as you'd like. Let's change that. So two main characters, the great lover king and the queen beloved, but poetically speaking, prophetically speaking, this is God in you, God in me, today, tomorrow, the next day. In the last video, we left the queen in a state of euphoria in the arms of her beloved. But in movement 1, we get to see her really at her worst, at a wholly other place. This is amazingly sophisticated ancient writings and poetry. The queen comes across almost modern. She's riddled with identity and emotional holes. One author put it this way about emotional holes. He said, people don't know that the hole, the sense of deficiency, is a symptom of a loss of something deeper, the loss of essence, which can be regained. They think the hole, the deficiency, is how they really are at the deepest level, and that there is nothing beyond it. They think something is wrong with them. Something is basically wrong. And that's where the king finds the queen. And that's where the King of Heavens, God, finds us today. All right, movement 1. That's chapter 1, verse 5 to 2:7. The mystery, the plot of the poems, is that the great lover king actually and irreversibly loves and romantically pursues with all the love in his vast heart this troubled, fearful, relationally destructive, unfaithful to the core, tone-deaf to others, self-destructive, shamed, and traumatized queen. So we begin the first movement with her inmost, very personal human fears related to this wonderful and scary relationship. She ambivalently, deeply desires the presence of her great lover king. I mean, not just the presence, right, but his embrace, this adoring partner who can't love her more than he does at that very moment. Yeah? But she's also frightened by it as well. She's cautious, she's cynical, she's paranoid, she's suspicious of, anything this good, if it's too good to believe, right? So she reflects what attachment theorists know now are two very subconscious questions that drive all of us. Here's the first one. Is there anyone out there who I can really count on, who will have my back when I mess up? And the word, one single word that reflects that is connectedness. Is there anybody out there that I can really trust? And 2, is there anyone out there who loves me, who really loves me as I am? And the single word that captures that is the word enoughness. And I'll say more about connectedness and enoughness in a second. But hopefully that makes sense to you. Now, she would likely have been told by so many and suspected that she was just a hot mess and a stigma to her family, the tribe, and oh my gosh, particularly to God. This would be typical of a traumatized adult, largely conditioned by painful events that happen early and often. Maybe she was abused, maybe her father was critical or absent emotionally or physically, maybe he died. There's lots of reasons she is what she is. And so what I'm saying is it's normal human reactionary behavior. It's not evil, not necessarily. It's needy, it's broken. And as a result, she is self-protecting to a fault. Self-deprecating, which is another defensive strategy. She can trigger, explode in anger in a moment, in rage when triggered, blaming anyone and everyone. She just cannot innately trust. She cannot love. She cannot be loved, not yet. Again, that's where the king finds her. Again, back to attachment theory, she is to some degree anxious and avoidant, right? One or both or together, because of actual or perceived relational deprivation or abuse. Now, the king, on the other hand, is perfectly secure in his skin. He seems present all the time. And by the way, it's good as you read the poems to imagine him always there. In her mind, he checks out and leaves. But imagine him poetically always there, always holding her, always romancing her, never leaving. That will help. Yet to her, he's absent sometimes. He seems close, yet distant at the same time, at least from her point of view. This is the Song of Songs of Solomon. But here's where we start. We'll start with the queen's enigmatic, ambivalent, harsh self-analysis. Dark am I, she says, yet lovely. O daughters of Jerusalem, dark like the tents of Kedar, like the tent curtains of Solomon, do not stare at me because I'm dark, because I'm darkened by the sun. All right. Well, if you remember verses 1 to 4 of the prologue, this is so clearly a change of tone and emotion. Verses 1 to 4 about her lover, how she desires her lover, the king, and the security she's feeling in a moment in the relationships, right? But then verse 5, and in verse 5, the lens of the poems in the reader turn to her. It's shocking, modern vulnerability. And I'm going to suggest, I'm just going to toss it out there, biblically unprecedented. Often psalmists do speak of oppression and pain under attack. Psalm 22, Psalm 88, Psalm 51, so many others. And the psalmist might confess guilt or shame or fear, depression. And often they will blame God for their turmoil. They often plead to God for a rescue. Well, to stay with our darkness theme, the author of Psalm 88 blames God for his state and sarcastically complains, "You, God, have taken my companions and loved ones from me. The darkness is my closest friend." Well, we don't get any sense of that woman blaming God or that darkness is anything close to a friend. She's letting us in on her most personal anxiety and feelings. Anne Lamott speaks of that inner sense of disfigurement, which is a deep shame that we all have, and the Queen particularly. The Queen doesn't have modern technical terms at her disposal like ambivalence, depression, victimization, suicide ideation, loneliness, chronic shame, but we can see their nasty fingerprints in the poetry. She cries out, "I'm dark yet lovely," and we get it. I mean, it's the most impressive 3 Hebrew words anywhere in poetry. You know, what in the world have I been thinking? Here's a question. If we were to transport back to see this woman face to face, look at her from a distance, observe, what do you think, what do you expect to see? Do you imagine that she would be a ravishing beauty that causes men's knees to buckle? Is she a model that would be suitable for the latest makeup commercial? If you're a lady, would you feel some jealousy at her regal stature or maturity or confidence? You know, a queen, right? Or might you suspect that you see a rake-thin, sunburned woman with hard, calloused hands, broken fingernails, bags under her young eyes from years of hard field labor and mistreatment, her hair graying and unkempt, her tired shoulders slumped, clothes torn and not more than rough coverings, quite baggy for protection and comfort in her work, far more than to enhance this or that bodily curve. And listen, would you blame her for her situation? Do you see her as an angry, complaining girl who needs an audience to vent? Maybe you would look at her and think something like, you know, if she only had a different life, if she was only born into a different family, a culture that honored women more, maybe this poor lady might have been attractive and maybe even royal. Well, as you look at her, how does she come across to you? Maybe she just disappears into the vineyard background. Maybe she's a ghost, a shadow, one of the so many beat-up laborers who prefer not to be noticed or seen. Yeah? Or is she just an angry, bitter woman, externalizing and defiant? Well, you can see in her eyes that she's had a legitimate beef with life and with her family and with God. It wouldn't take much more than a look for her to trigger maybe and pour her complaints to you or anyone else who might pay attention to her story. And that's the brilliance of this poetry. We're invited to see the subject from a number of points of view. And the readers of poetry, we really are aware that we always look at the poetry and the characters in the poems through subjective lenses, through our own context. So maybe you can really, really, really emotionally relate to this unfortunate woman. Well, I can tell you this, nothing has hurt her more than relationships that haven't lived up to what she expected. That's her point of view. Even those moments of intimacy where she made bad choices, we'll say more about that, clearly didn't live up to her hopes. So here's my expanded interpretive translation. O daughters of Jerusalem, though I am attractive in some ways, my skin betrays me. See the dark tan? It clearly evidences the hours working in the fields. See, it's not pasty white like a pampered princess who was raised in shaded courts. It's earthy and dark, like the tents of desert raiders, like the dark curtains of the temple. Please do not stare judgmentally at me, for I am not by nature royalty. The sun has burnt my skin. So really, I'm unpacking, and she's unpacking that simple phrase, dark yet lovely. And it captures all of that. And she does not say, to be clear, lovely and a dash of darkness. She leads with dark. And the addition of yet lovely or yet beautiful adds a tragic ambivalence, some depth to the character. Maybe it connotes, I could have been ravishing. I could have been enviable. I could have been desirable. If only I had a different life, a different family. I was born in a different time. If I had made better personal choices. But that ship has left the dock. I was promising as a young girl, but then the world did what it does to young girls who are of little cultural worth. I'm spent, and yet just a young girl still. A word about her age. This might shock you, but it was very common for girls in ancient Israel to be betrothed at 12 and a half, and so married around 13 or 14. It just was the typical thing. And they were betrothed really immediately after the time of their first period. And the queen could easily, maybe be 15, maybe be 16, but I think we're to assume she's an adolescent still. Her brothers likely see her that way, and here's their observation at the end of the song. We have a young sister, and her breasts are not yet grown, meaning she's just a spindly teenager. She's a kid. So it seems like, with comments like that, her family was not a source of any emotional security or safety for her. All right, back to her testimony, verse 6. My mother's sons were angry with me and made me take care of the vineyards. Now here's my interpretive translation. It started so early for me. My brothers were mean to me. They forced me to be a hired hand in the vineyard. You wouldn't do that to a young girl that you loved or thought had value and needed to be protected. Wow. So my brothers, right, my mother's sons, were so angry, hara in the Hebrew, that she could feel the heat. This word is related to an Aramaic root meaning to cause fire to burn. It's a word that has heat to it. It creates emotions. The Hebrew verb is always used in reference to anger. So it has the complementary aspects of emotional anger with the heat of a burning destructive fire. So we might choose the words fury or indignation or ire or wrath, right? All of those intense emotional states that are induced by displeasure. I mean, great displeasure. Somebody doesn't like you. And she could see the anger. She could feel the anger from their eyes, their stares. Another way of looking at this is her brothers angrily made her work the vineyard. Again, patriarchal culture, so it's not surprising that young girls would be made to do things they didn't want. And that might be part of it. But from her point of view, it feels like her brother's demands was a punishment of sorts. They were enraged with displeasure at her, and they made her suffer as a worker in the vineyard. No sense of worth or honor. Vineyard keeping was hard work. Like Israel has large regions of rocky hills where crops can't grow, and there's little grass for sheep. But between the rocks, you can get down to some good soil, and if the roots get down there, like grapevines would do, they could grow great grapes. The vineyard worker, so, must clear away stones and weeds using a hoe or mattock. The stones would be used to create a low wall that surrounded the vines. Terraces must be shaped. Vine shoots must be carefully planted and watered and pruned and cared for and guarded. Vineyards, by the way, typically had a stone tower to guard against thieves and animals that would plunder the ripe fruit. And the tower would also provide shade from the intense Israeli sun. So manual harvesting, which would happen in August or so, they would pick the grapes, send them to a wine press nearby for processing. And as you can imagine, this was not a place for a vulnerable young teenage girl whose reputation needed to be guarded to be among a bunch of vineyard keepers. This was oppression, she thought, and against her will. She was forced due to her brother's anger at her. And she had no respite, no rescuer. No one had her back. Did she do something that caused them to be angry? I mean, we haven't interviewed them, but from her point of view, it's their anger that caused this. So we can surmise still, though, that her family was not very supportive, not a secure place. No one, from her point of view, in her close family was there for her, had her back, made her feel lovable. Yeah? I'm darkened by the sun, she says. I'm going to unpack that. I have been gazed upon by the sun. The Hebrew word is shazaf, and it's an intense, burning staring, right? It's like the brother's anger, but by the sun. And it scorched her, just like her brother scorched her, and it made her skin black. Caused her pain, diminished her societal value, her beauty. So not only is she confessing that her family of origin wasn't safe, the world is not a safe place for her. And lastly, she pleads to whoever her immediate audience is, and don't you stare at me either, because I'm dark. I mean, don't you burn me. I've had it with people burning me. Don't look down on me like the sun did, or with the anger that my family had looked down upon me. I mean, maybe we could picture her as pleading, or I prefer defiant, but we're not sure. She just believes that she's not going to find anyone who has her back. Is it an overstatement? I don't know. That's her testimony in this poem. Well, there's one last perpetrator who has burned her, who has treated her badly, who diminished her and her sense of worth. You know who it is? Her. The queen herself. And we're going to pick that up next time. But in summary, from her point of view, the entire universe has scorched value out of her, bled her dry. Her caregivers, unsafe, abusive, indifferent, and even the Israeli sun took advantage and burned her as well. She's helpless. And then she will suffer shaming at her own hand. And she's not able to stop any of it. Either way, from her point of view, her beatdown is complete. And look, we know her. I mean, look, often we are her, right? We've all felt this. This is where God finds her. This is where God finds you. This is the gospel of God's love for the unlovable. God loves for the beat up. And not just at our conversion, but yesterday, today, tomorrow. And this is the point. We still need God's love for the unlovable. And to be clear, I'm not talking about having it. We have it. Jesus purchased that for us 2,000 years ago. I'm speaking about experiencing it now in my midbrain, in the midst of the Israeli sun, or working in hard labor, or in relationships that continue to beat me up. And the idea is, can you imagine the difference it's going to make for this particular queen to be in the arms of the king? And you too. When her doubts kind of go away for the moment and anxieties diminish for a moment, where even though he's seeing my dark secrets and the things that I've done wrong, he doesn't change his mind. He's still there. He has my back, and I'm lovable. Look, if we're in the middle of that, how would that affect our other relationships? It's powerful. Our longing for more sense of worth and value and identity, all of this would be huge. This is the secret working of the Holy Spirit, says theologian John Calvin, to make me experience the favor of God for me as I am today. I think we're learning that the reason that I can't seem to experience it that much is that my midbrain has been so beat up and so disappointed by relationships that it's set up powerful protective barriers, strongholds to keep me from getting hurt again. But it's screaming out for more of the experience of the love of Christ that Christ purchased for me 2,000 years ago. It's mine. But we must access power from God, Ephesians 3, in order to defeat those subconscious strongholds over and over and over again. We cannot do it on our own. And this is what sanctification is all about, if I can toss out a definition. It's a reduction of the time between the experiences of this amazing love of God for unlovables like me. You with me? I want that. Well, that's our passion here, is we want to help. We created a little bookmark prayer that you can say aloud to your beat up midbrain. Think of it as a gospel presentation to that unreached people group, your critical inner voice. It's going to take time. It's going to take repetition 2 to 3 times a day for 30 to 40 days or so. But you will be surprised at the difference it makes. It sounds absurd, but I could tell you story after story of transformation, a little or a lot. How? Why? Because it reflects the gospel of God's love for unlovables. The gospel is the power of God to believe, says Paul in Romans 1. Believe what? Well, among other things, to actually believe and experience that God actually loves me that much. All right, here it is. Just listen. Jesus follower, strictly because of what Jesus did for you 2,000 years ago, God actually loves you. He loves you with all of his heart, as much as the Father loves the Son and the Son loves the Father. He can't love you any more or any less than he does right now. He loves you as you are, not as you should be or could be. You can't add to this love or take away from it. Now, I get it. It often feels like you've messed it up or need to do something so that God would like you better. Not so. How do you experience it more now? That's the question. Simple. Good news, there is something that you can do and are invited to do. You can take daily baby steps to ask the Spirit inside of you to make you know, experience, and feel just how much God loves you right now. Just ask. Ask again later today. Ask tomorrow. Make it a spiritual habit. Well, ladies, you can get this in bookmark form from our webpage store, www.gospelrant.com. Get a bunch, hand them out to your family and friends. They will thank you. And while you're at the page, do me a big favor. Click follow so that you can get future podcasts and register on the site. And when you do, you'll get the Song of Songs diagram and a free gift. And also, I am rewriting my book on the Song of Songs. If you're on the mailing list, you'll get heads up when we're about to publish. It will be a book that is going to blow the roof off of spiritual formation and Christian counseling. Look, your support is important to me. Let me know what you're getting out of the series. Bill@gospel-app.com. Give the podcast a review. This one, it might encourage someone else to listen to it. And thanks ahead of time. We're going to pick this up here in the next video. Take heart, child of God.